All right, Doug Smith with another Restaurant Mastermind on LinkedIn. This is the second conversation that I've had with Danny Klein, Director of Digital Content at Food News Media, QSR Magazine, and FSR Magazine. You fit all of that on a business card. Good for you. But Danny, you and I talked at the beginning of COVID, and you gave some really good insights into what was happening in the industry and how PPP and all these different things were going on. Well, we've made it through phase one, essentially. Now we've got another wave of COVID, another thing of shutdowns and uncertainty. So if you had to summarize the sentiment of the industry right now with all the conversations that you have, how would you summarize what you're seeing and feeling right now in the restaurant hospitality world?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me again. I actually think in terms of sentiment, we're kind of at a similar place that we were in the beginning, in a certain way, only that you have a very divergent conversation happening. Really in quick service, you kind of saw what Zaxby is this morning getting an investment or selling a stake of the company. And there's a lot of money going into that side of the sector, right now. And the reason for that is that it's actually pretty optimistic. A lot of quick service brands are doing, way better than they were doing a year ago. We kind of highlight a few. Wingstop is at record levels, Domino's and Papa John's are at record highs in sales, and a lot of that stems from a few different factors. The first one being that they're naturally set up to kind of serve this, current customer and dynamic, and then the other part of that is that the competitive set is, smaller. So you have, optimism on one side, and then you have, the opposite on kind of that full service independent side. And that, again, if we went back, 8 months or whatever it's been, that was still this, the situation. So I think in some ways, as we head into, as you mentioned, kind of, maybe it's a second phase, it's hard to kind of keep tracks of all the different, up and downs here. But, with winter coming, there are a lot of full service independents, that maybe have been holding on, that I think it's going to be a rough few months here. I don't know how you get around that, because one of the things about outdoor dining being such a beneficial thing recently, of course, you're going to have weather constraints there. And, there have been things that cities like New York have done to kind of allow it to continue, but that's a really expensive proposition. And we don't really know, will customers really even want to go outside and dine, even if they're kind of in an outdoor tent with heaters? What is that experience like? You have to kind of assume it's going to go down a little bit, and a lot of these restaurants have been piling up debt. Do they have the money to now go out and get, a bunch of new equipment? I've read some horror stories on, publications like Eater talking about how even just difficult it is to get, some of these, electric heaters at this point. Some of them are back ordered months in advance and all this stuff. So, will some of these concepts, throw in the towel? Do they have a choice? And so I kind of think that's where we're at from a sentiment perspective. You got kind of another wary round here of how do we add this additional layer of, cold weather into the equation. And also, you mentioned the PPP, and we're kind of sitting at this purgatory state of, government aid. Got this $120 billion Restaurant Act that's just hanging out there. We don't know what the transition or kind of this state we're at now. Of course, we've got two sides pulling on whether or not the election was legitimate, or if we have a president-elect or not. And that whole, bubble is kind of overwhelming this idea that we, do need more, direct aid. Restaurants never received direct aid. It was, of course, the PPP loans were really helpful and some of the other things out there, but, they need more. That's just the nature of what's going on. You see all sorts of studies emerging that say, if there is no direct aid, will they make it through the winter? 85%, according to James Beard, said they probably won't. So it's a dire time. There's a lot of different things going on. And I think if you're a counter service brand with a heavy drive-through footprint, you're probably feeling pretty good. And you probably will even, decrease when things improve, as crazy as that sounds. But still, it's a much better place to be. So that's kind of the, I guess the ceiling view of where we stand today. But it's a very complicated conversation, and it has been since day one.
I guess there's one word that if you played a drinking game right now in the restaurant industry, you would be snockered off your rear end, and that would be the word pivot. Everyone's pivoting. If every time you heard pivot, you took a drink, you're gone. But people have to pivot. And you put up an article just a little while ago. We're recording this on the 19th, a little after 11 o'clock, about new revenue streams, how to survive. What are you seeing, since you're on the front line and talking with restaurant people every day, on how they're getting creative? What are they doing to try to survive?
Yeah, so I pulled that article up. It was actually written by my friend Bruce Reinstein, who's a consultant with Kinetic 12. But yeah, a lot of the pivots, the word pivot has been kind of interesting because I think you're most successful when you pivot to something that was a pre-COVID trend. If you're a fast food restaurant and you started to see mobile ordering pickups and now you're just pivoting in that full-on direction like you're seeing with, some of these giant quick service chains like McDonald's and KFC going to these, restaurant models that are designed to serve that guest. I mean, that's a much more or a much easier pivot and probably one that's going to be more successful long term, but now, full service, when you talk about pivots, you're talking about kind of that near term survival. So the article by Bruce today, and we're talking things like, groceries becoming a permanent revenue stream, serving kind of some of those essential, pantry items, but doing it in a way that, maybe a customer doesn't have to, go to the grocery store, tap some of those options that get crowded up really quickly, like, Instacart and stuff like that. Butcher shop programs, take home kits, we see this at Texas Roadhouse and, TGI Fridays, where they serve you kind of like a, kit of food where it comes with seasoning and directions and you get to still make it because, there is an element of, consumers just don't really trust prepared food that they didn't have their hands on. So that takes care of that. And it also erases some of that concern where if like you order a steak, what does it look like when you get it home? So we've seen that, and curbside has been kind of, I would say, the most prevalent pivot, for full service, just, in terms of you see those makeshift drive-throughs in the parking lot and the cones and you pull up and they drop it in the back seat. That's it's preferable to a lot of people because they don't have to deal with the delivery fees, and they don't have to walk into the restaurant if they just wanted to pick up. And with that going hand in hand, you've seen a lot of family meals and kind of discounting those bundles and things of that nature. And then one thing Bruce mentions too is this expanded day part concept, and you see this mostly kind of with Starbucks and Dunkin' and some of those brands that used to be really focused on the morning, because they've lost that consumer for the most part because people are working from home and, their routines are just thrown off. And, hopefully that comes back over time, but, that's obviously a challenge currently. So, how could you deal with that? I talked to a breakfast chain, on the full service side a couple of months back, and how they kind of approach this is that, they sell alcohol kind of like during a brunch, day part. And that's really picked up because, people could go out to lunch now and, maybe they do it on their own schedule. Maybe they do it for 2 hours, maybe they drink and they don't tell their employer, stuff like that. So you really have to kind of target, things that weren't, such a big deal before, because peak hours have taken a pretty big hit, especially on the weekends. There's definitely consumers a little bit wary of walking into a crowded restaurant on a Saturday, but maybe they feel different about noon on a Tuesday, stuff like that, But I think the most things we hear are people doing, it's a lot of tech related stuff, it's a lot of creative. How can I get my food to people in ways that, I wasn't before, bringing the experience home to them, stuff like virtual parties, Commander's Palace in New Orleans, they started doing this kind of like they would have one night where people would sign in and they just get to learn about wine and cheese. And Commander's Palace was actually, delivering the wine and cheese to them. And then you'd hop on and there'd be a lot of different people and then kind of the wine guy and the winemaker, and you'd learn about what you were eating. And that's actually turned into such a big business for them that they launched it nationally, using kind of Gold Belly to deliver. So stuff like that, It's been really all over the map. Um, and that's been probably the best thing to see, because the sector has always been known for innovation and you've seen it coming out. But again, it always comes back to how long can these sort of life rafts really sustain restaurants without, dying in business and higher capacity inside. So, the pivot on the quick service side, I think are lasting changes and they're going to be here 5 years from now. For full service, I kind of see higher tech adoption and curbside as being the last things. But some of this other stuff like cocktail kits to take home and things, I don't know if those will endure forever.
Seems like one of the other shifts that's going on too is the overall brick and mortar restaurant footprint. You have these modulars now, where it's a much smaller footprint that you can essentially drop a restaurant in the middle of an empty parking lot anymore. But you have Buffalo Wings and Rings as an example. They have their brand new floor plan, if you will, right here where I live. It's 5 minutes that way. You have KFC, Taco Bell coming out with new. What have you heard or read or high ups that you've talked to regarding how COVID is going to change the overall footprint of the restaurants? Because they seem to be going smaller now with more emphasis on drive-through, valet, carry out, that type of stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's what you're going to see. And Buffalo Wings and Rings is a really interesting one. It's one of the kind of the early, full service manifestations of this world, and they have it set up in kind of it's almost like a zoned approach, where you have a fast casual element that's contactless if you want, so you can, walk into one section, and then you have tech on your phone where you could order and have it delivered, and you can really have a whole experience without, ever talking to a server, which sounds crazy if you if you think about, what was the differentiator of, paying more to actually dine in at a full service restaurant a year ago. You would have never even thought about that as being an option, which is why in Buffalo Wings and Rings case, they still have that, in one part of the restaurant. But what they started to understand was that sort of bar forward component of, I just want to come and hang with my friends, I don't want to talk to anybody, was really gaining steam. So they built that in, and then they built it with tech so that you can do all of these things with, out the interaction. So that, that contactless world on the quick service side, I mean, it's going to only gain steam because it was gaining steam before, COVID. There really aren't a lot of quick service restaurants. I mean, they do exist, especially in fast casual, where you went in there thinking, I really want to be served by a cashier, because that was, if anything, it was more of a hindrance than it was a benefit of that model, because your whole goal was to, capture convenience, and convenience was something that was taking on momentum for years, and especially as you kind of saw, the delivery and third-party delivery. I mean, that was what was driving it. You were seeing people were actually willing to pay, what I consider to be somewhat exorbitant fees to even have solo orders, just so you didn't have to leave the house and, deal with people. So you're seeing that now in the development of the footprints. I mean, Taco Bell's Go Mobile design, you could order ahead, and just kind of pull up into a curbside spot and have them bring it out, or you could pull through the drive-through. What you're seeing a lot of too, is these double drive-throughs, one for mobile orders and one for, regular guests. And then Chipotle's case, Noodles and Company does this too, where, there isn't even a digital menu board to order off of. You have to go through the app or website ahead of time and, just pull up. And I think that right there is going to be a massive shift, in this, because one of the things that restaurants want right now is to get you into that app, because that data is so important now to connect that one-to-one experience that third-party delivery has really disrupted, because they're stealing that information, in a manner of speaking. I wouldn't call it stealing, but they're taking or hoarding data. And so how do you, lose that customer experience? You might lose that brand value through third parties. So getting a customer onto your app, frequency goes up. You're able to remarket to them if you notice they haven't been in a while, and stuff like that is invaluable. And also, they also seem to carry higher check orders, and and things of that nature. So they're basically, what you're seeing is a restaurant building that caters to all of these things, and a lot of them don't even have dining rooms. That's kind of the buzzy part of it, that they're just set up for this one purpose, and I see that more as being a mix, and I don't know that that'll ever take over like a KFC. They just might sprinkle these sort of units throughout. So it's kind of an exciting time. But one thing, and I've heard this a lot, is that those type of restaurants, even if COVID had never happened, they were coming. Might have taken 5 years instead of 15 months, but that's the story of this whole deal, is that it's compressing that innovation cycle. So yeah, I mean, the restaurant of the future, to me, it was kind of already here in our minds. We're just seeing that start to actually develop, and I think it'll benefit the consumer in a lot of ways. Again, it's just a heavy quick service benefit more than anything else.
No, that's cool, and I appreciate your time and your insight. You're all over the place, and I encourage anybody who is not connected with you or following you on Facebook or LinkedIn that they should, because your content is outstanding. I learn a lot from reading your stuff every day, and that's the reason why I wanted to reach out and connect. And I'm gonna share bits and pieces of this throughout LinkedIn, because that's where we all need to help each other out. And the more we can learn and adjust and grow from this experience, the better off we're going to be. So I certainly appreciate your insights and your time. And hopefully we can talk again in maybe 3 or 4 months and COVID is behind us and we have a much better outlook on things, instead of just hoping we can look into our crystal ball.
Yeah, sadly, I wouldn't count on it. But I appreciate
point.
your optimism. I would think, from most things I hear, I guess, it's more like the spring, but who knows, it's hard to predict these things. But yeah, Facebook is kind of a scary place, so I avoid that. But LinkedIn is great. Even get to see a picture of my dog who's in the background here.
I know.
So
I love him. He's like, yeah, whatever. He's probably been in more videos than he can even understand, right?
yeah, well, yeah, she will be in that spot from about 8 in the morning till 4 in the afternoon. So it's it's good though. I'm happy
I
she.
love it.
All right,
Yeah,
well,
cool, man. Thanks, Danny. I appreciate your time and your insights as always, and I look forward to reading more of your stuff on LinkedIn.
stay safe.
Thanks, man. You too.